Welcome to video 2 for chapter 3 in anatomy, a review of biology. In this video, we're going to start talking about movement of materials across a cell membrane. So the simplest form of movement is called diffusion. And diffusion is simply the movement from high concentration to low concentration. So if a substance is in a high concentration in one area, it automatically moves without any energy expenditure and spreads throughout an area. This is most common when we're talking about liquids and gases. So this is termed passive. And what passive means is no energy needed or required for this to occur. It just happens. In the cell membrane, one thing that can easily pass through the cell membrane through diffusion are lipids. So lipids diffuse easily. And that's because if water actually does move through the cell membrane, but we'll talk about that here in a second. But if we have a lipid, it can actually squeeze between the heads that are hydrophilic and go through the hydrophobic region, because remember that like things will dissolve in like things or mix with them. So if water is an exception, but if you had something else that was hydrophilic or hydrophobic, it would not be able to pass through the membrane. So a lot of things pass through the membrane, water being one, but if we have channels that are basically just open tubes, things can get diffused between the ECF and ICF, and that's usually what occurs. So other things may travel through channels. Some channels allow anything to come in, some channels allow only one certain thing to come in. Channels can be open, they can open and close. So there's all different types of channels. So that's diffusion. Good example of this, if I were to spray air freshener in a room, wherever the spray is coming out, there's a very high concentration of substance. And it spreads throughout the room because the molecules, the scent molecules, are hitting into the air molecules. They all have energy, so they're ricocheting off of each other, and they just keep on ricocheting throughout the room until it's spread throughout. So that's why it really does not require energy to move things by diffusion, because it automatically happens due to interactions between molecules. So if we look at well, maybe, it looks like I might be missing a page here. Oh, nope, it's on the back here. Sorry about that. So our second one is called osmosis. Something that was covered very heavily in Bio 1. And this is a form of diffusion, but it's the diffusion of water across the cell membrane. And the reason water is able to move through the cell membrane, even because of the hydrophobic areas, is because it is so small compared to everything else. The cell membrane is not static, which means that those phospholipids are vibrating back and forth and moving. So the water molecules can actually like shimmy through that area rather quickly. So water is able to diffuse across the cell membrane. A lot of other things cannot do that. So we end up with water being the conduit for diffusion. So if something cannot cross the cell membrane, it could be built up on one side. And we know that concentration deals with how much there is per unit volume of water. So if you have a big buildup inside the cell, of, let's say, a certain protein. Well, the protein can't move across the cell membrane, but water can. So water is going to move to try to dilute that concentration. So this means that water moves to the side with the higher solute concentration. So that gives us three different situations with respect to cells. And these are all vocab words. Hypertonic, isotonic, and hypotonic. Again, hyper and hypo, we talked about. Iso, we haven't. So if something is hypertonic, hyper means above or higher. We have a high concentration. I'm going to abbreviate concentration to CONC of solute comparable or compared to something else. So there's a high concentration of solute compared. So if we have a high concentration of solute compared to the cell, so we are talking about solutions that we're placing a cell into. If the outside solution, the ECF, is hypertonic, it has more stuff than inside the cell, the ICF. Water moves out of the cell and the cell shrivels. So we put a strawberry into sugar water. There's a lot more sugar on the outside than compared to inside the strawberry. The strawberries make a solution. The water moves out, the strawberries shrink. We put a lot of salt on the outside of a piece of beef. The water moves out of the cell, out of the muscle cells, and the meat shrivels. We get beef jerky. That's why when we cure meats, we put them in salt. It draws out the water. That's because we created a hypertonic solution outside of the cell, and water moves out of the cell. Isotonic means that we have the same concentration. So nothing occurs. So there's no H2O movement. So nothing happens to the cell. Example of this, when you remove, let's say, a kidney for a transplant, you want the kidney to remain healthy, we would place the kidney in an isotonic cold solution to help preserve that. So no water is moving in or out of the cells of the kidney while it's in transport. So they mimic the internal fluid, the ICF structure, in order to transport it. Hypotonic. Hypo means below or lower. So we have a low concentration of solute compared to the cell. So water moves in and cell swells or can lyse, which just means rupture or break or dissolve, whatever you want to say. It's related to the suffix lysis that we talked about. So with this, hypotonic. So if I wanted a cell to swell up a little bit, I could put the cell in a hypotonic solution, which could be like pure water. Because there are things in our cells, there are already things dissolved. If we put a cell in pure water, it's going to swell up and it can break the cell membrane. This is why when they give you an IV, it has stuff dissolved in there. They do not give an IV of pure water, or cells in the body would start swelling, which would not be good.